Thank you all for joining our webinar today, Windows Workloads in the AWS Cloud. Today, we will cover off a quick overview of the typical customer cloud journey. We will hear from Joe on the ClickView cloud journey. We'll then hear from Sara and Sri with more detail of Microsoft and AWS, followed by a Q&A. My name is Daryl King, and I'm your host for today. PolarSeven is an AWS advanced consulting partner with DevOps competency. We have been accelerating customer cloud journeys to Amazon Web Services since 2013. We love to see organizations embrace public cloud and reap the long-term benefits of increased security and reduced total cost of ownership. At PolarSeven, we utilize our technical capabilities and experience to help organizations accelerate their adoption of AWS cloud technologies to achieve successful and sustainable business outcomes. They say a picture tells 1,000 words, and this is one of them. We have found over the years with migrating and modernizing customer environments is that they will typically embark on a journey like this. The time period can take anywhere from 1 to 5 years, depending on their appetite. It all starts with an assessment. This has evolved over the years and is a much more streamlined process now. The assessment now can provide you with a huge amount of intel on the long-term benefits of migrating to cloud, saving on infrastructure and licensing costs. It really is a no-brainer to kick this process off as it's not tied to the following stages. Migrations have also evolved with new tools and solutions reducing migration times. Solutions like Database Migration Service and Cloud Migration Services work well in reducing your time to migrate. In our experience, a lot of customers have a settling in period after the initial migration, and then when ready to jump into a modernization project. We are seeing a lot of new hybrid cloud options happening here. What I mean by that is that you will have all the benefits of cloud with lots of automation and cloud scalability, but you will have a mixture of EC2 for all business apps with a mixture of containers and serverless for the rest, with a revamp of the underlying database engines. We'll now hand over to Joe Poor, Chief Product Officer at ClickView, often dubbed the Netflix of education, who will share his journey from a customer perspective. Over to you, Joe.
Hey guys, so I just wanted to speak a little bit about our journey to AWS and how PolarSeven and AWS sort of helped us get there. And so Daryl asked me just to sort of tell our story, and hopefully that's somewhat interesting to you guys. And if you have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat, and Simon will read them out to me. But first, a little bit of history. So you can think about ClickView as like Netflix, just but for education. So we have a streaming platform with thousands of videos that we stream into schools and educational institutes all around the world. When I joined, it was on premise. It was like a physical server that used to sit in schools, and it was sort of before cloud was a term. And so we started just putting it on the internet, and that was what we called it back then. And sort of by the time I joined the company, we sort of had this like hybrid of, we were running all our databases in our own DC. And on premise, and we were sort of Azure. We had some services in Azure, mainly all of our video storage. And sort of we started looking at sort of some of the best web technologies, open source web technologies like RabbitMQ, Elasticsearch, that sort of stuff. But our stack was Windows. We were running, .NET framework applications on Windows servers. And sort of our stack kind of looked a bit like, there's a lot of large monolithic applications. There were some APIs, a lot of large databases. And we had about 2 petabytes of video that we were storing and streaming for customers. And so when we started talking to AWS, we really wanted to, move to the cloud properly and not just sort of move our mess. That was sort of like a bit of a mantra that we had, was let's not move our mess. And so we kind of broke it down into 3 phases. So we're going to relocate and clean up where possible as we. Oh, you've lost. Yeah, you've lost, Daryl. You're not sharing your screen anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm just putting it up there. Sorry.
Thanks, Lee. We we were going to relocate as the first phase and clean up where possible. Just to clean up. Consistent naming was the biggest one. We sort of, it was the free win we got just from moving things. Then we were going to modernize, and then we were going to refactor. And so we decided to move to AWS largely just for the stability at the time. We were growing really quickly, and we needed to keep everything online and stable for our customers. And so when we started moving things, we looked at the engineering tasks as well. We said, what can we optimize? What can we improve? What are some of the quick wins that, again, so we don't move our mess, we don't have that same mess in the same place. And so we introduced a proper CICD pipeline. We said that everything that's going to be deployed into AWS will be deployed for a proper pipeline. We created AMIs for everything. Even though we were still on Windows servers, we created AMIs for everything with New Relic. So we could, we had logging and monitoring on every single service. And then we proceeded to start moving. We had about 100 services that we needed to move, including our monolithic applications. And we had some really large databases that were sort of made up of MySQL and MS SQL or SQL Server. And so we started moving all of that to Azure. And that was fine. That was going quite well until we realized that we need to move 2 petabytes of data from one cloud to another. And if you move it through the internet, it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars in egress. So Amazon offers something called Snowball, which is like a physical, it's a truck with some drives on the back that you can go and plug into your DC and download all the content, and then they'll drive it over to their data center and upload it to S3. But that was going to be too slow, and we'd miss our timeline. So we kind of came up with quite a novel way to do it, which was we found a data center that had a direct connection to both Azure and to AWS. And we physically plugged the cable into Azure, down into our big beefy server, and then one into AWS. And we pretty much sucked it out of Azure and straight up into AWS for almost no cost, which was a big win for us at the time. So all the time we didn't want to have any dead downtime with all of this. So as we were migrating a service, we'd cut over to the service once it was deployed to AWS and stable. With the storage, we did the same thing. Once we moved the data across, we verified everything was had been moved across correctly, and then we cut across to that and just started streaming videos from AWS instead of Azure. So there's really like no downtime, and none of our customers even knew that we'd sort of migrated from our hybrid, on-premise Azure mess into AWS. And so once we'd done that, we pretty much moved everything into AWS, and it was pretty much taken everything as is and moved into AWS and cleaned up as where possible. And then we just left it running for a month, and we basically over-provisioned every server, and we just said, we don't want to go down if we've made the wrong calculation here. We're going to over-provision, and we're going to get some baseline numbers. And so we ran it for a month, which was an expensive month. But I would always say, talk to AWS. They're always happy to help you there in those circumstances. And then what we did was we did something called a well-architected review with AWS. And so they'll bring in some SAs or solution architects and help us, right size is what they call. So, have you over provisioned a server for the amount of resources that service needs, things like that. Are the databases over provisioned, for the amount of reads or writes they're getting, things like that. So we did that across the board. And then we bought reserved instances, which basically is a prepaid function where we could say, hey, I'm going to commit to using this much, commit to this allocation of resources ahead of time, pay for it up front, and they'll give you a better price than this pricing. So once we'd sort of right-sized and bought reserved instances, we were in a really good position. It was it was cost effective. Everything was stable, but that was still really only phase one, which was just to relocate. The next thing we started to do was look at how do we run up everything on Linux, because we didn't want to be on Windows. Windows is expensive. You're paying a license fee as well as you're paying for larger VMs because the OS has so much, such a resource hog. So we started looking at rewriting all our services in .NET Core, which I can't say enough good things about. If you haven't looked into it, I would recommend it. It's simple, it's fast, it's easy for all your team to get onto, especially if they have a .NET background. So we rewrote every application in .NET Core. We moved to a fully microservice infrastructure and sort of broke down all our monolithic applications. And that's sort of where PolarSeven came in to help us. As I say, we kind of stream video to schools, so we kind of know what our usage patterns are going to look like. We know that, you know, between 8 and 4:30, that's when our heaviest usage is. So we sort of set that as a baseline. So everything will scale up for the school day, and then school will scale down naturally or automatically. And so we started running that on Docker, and that started working for us really, really well. So we're running .NET Core on Docker now. The nice thing about that as well is if it's like if it's raining and, you know, the kids are going to have to stay in at recess and watch a movie, we know that the usage is going to spike again. It will still auto scale up from our baseline, from our school day baseline, but it will naturally sort of scale up between those times as well. Sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that. Between the school hours, it will scale up, and then it will scale up again if the traffic requirements are there. And so that's kind of where PolarSeven really helped us, was sort of you know, making that change from being Windows to actually Linux. You know, we're running predominantly about 90% of our services now run on containers, which is brilliant. It's really cost effective, and the stability is awesome. You know, if there's anything I could say, like, we kind of did that before COVID, and while all the other our not competitors, but other companies in our sector were struggling with the newfound load, we were actually thinking about new features, because that was, you know, so stable for us. With our newfound load, you know, schools watching more and more video during COVID, we just automatically scaled up, and the platform just handled it really elegantly and really well. So that was a huge win for us, and we were in a great position just to think about, you know, what features we could do to help our teachers and students who are sort of, you know, learning to cope with this new context. So that's kind of I guess a little bit about our journey. It took us about probably 18 months really to do the full migration. I mean, we moved everything across, and we were running in production in about 6 months. But then 18 months where after we'd sort of optimized and moved everything and refactored it to run on Linux and things like that. Again, it was probably, if we hadn't have done it at the time we'd done it, we would have really, really struggled during the pandemic and things like that. So for us, it was perfect timing. I think that's probably the long and the short of it, Daryl.
Great, thank you very much for that, Joe. Much appreciated. So now the current state that you're in is, you know, all containers, 90% containers, .NET Core. Do you have an idea, like the amount of savings that you think you would have, or a percentage in savings compared to where you were post 18 months ago to now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about you guys, but the pandemic's ruined all our numbers. You know, all our baselines have just gone out the window because of the new usage. But I think it saved us probably close to about 40% moving to containers and Linux. If you just look at the cost savings of just not having Windows VMs, or Windows EC2, it's huge. If you can compare that just on the price calculator on their website, on Amazon's website, you know, just looking at EC2 Linux versus EC2 Windows, it's you know, not comparing apples to apples.
And what do you think would be the main barrier? Because is it to make that transition, right, to a Linux base as opposed to the Windows?
I think that, I mean, other companies that we've spoken to, they're daunted by it. You know, do I need to hire a whole new engineering team? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? I think that where we're at right now is there's very few good excuses why you can't just pick a piece of it and move that to .NET Core and just I don't think anyone ever does 100%. Usually you do about 90%, 80% like we did. Some services are just not worth changing to be running in .NET Core. It's easier just to pay the price of the Windows VM and leave it as such. We've definitely got legacy applications that we have no intention of refactoring. The engineering time just wouldn't yield anything. So I think just being smart about which parts you can, and also just sort of thinking about it as an investment in the future. The other thing is, like, there's other benefits which are a bit hidden, but software engineers don't want to work on legacy frameworks. They want to work on new. So it's a great retention tool. People want to work on new tech. They want to be proud of the work they're doing. So that's been a hidden benefit, I'd say.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's the common pattern you're seeing. You migrate to cloud, but you don't completely get rid of everything. You don't change all of it. There's percentages, and you end up with this new hybrid version of on a cloud platform, which is fine, I think. So yeah, great.
Yeah, I'd just say our approach has been, we'd rather just sunset the service than rewrite some of the old stuff. So let's just announce an end of life and then supersede it with the new sort of microservice version or the new .NET Core version.
Yeah, great. So that's all the questions I have for you now, Joe. There may be a few more that'll come in for the end of it. So we'll do another Q&A session at the end. So for now, I'd like to hand over to, thank you, Joe. We'll now hand over to Sara and Sriwantha from Amazon Web Services. Sara, if you want to take it over there, away you go.
Sure, Darryl, thank you. Let me share my screen and we'll get started.
Brilliant.
You can see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. How are you doing, everybody? Sara Williams, as Darryl said, I'm from AWS. I've spent a lot of time working with customers like yourselves over the years. I've spent the last 20 odd years in around systems integration and professional services providers. So some of the pieces that we're going to walk through today around these Windows workloads on AWS, I can kind of leverage on some of that thinking in terms of what I've seen customers really looking to do in the space over time. Sri, do you want to jump on and say a quick hello as well before we start? Sri is my partner in crime here at AWS. So, together we work across this Windows specialization area.
Hey guys, Sriwantha Attanayake, Senior Partner Solution Architect based out of Sydney, focusing around Microsoft technologies. Previously, I was mainly involved with application development side, managing about 80+ developers. So it's a complex IT environment, and now helping customers like you to build Microsoft solutions on AWS. So that's about me.
Thank you, Sri. So, we've heard from Joe and Darryl today around the journey into cloud. So what I really want to kind of reflect on is the point at which you start. So what are those key considerations you need to have covered before you launch in? Joe talked about the journey there in terms of a complete lift and shift and then a modernization strategy to follow. Darryl covered off the pathway to cloud, which was assess, migrate, modernize. So we typically see customers at all stages across this journey, but the one thing that they have in common is, how do you get a really good grip on where to start, and how do you understand what's going on in your current environment, and why, and which cloud provider then to really move those workloads to. So one of the key things to kind of consider in the move to the cloud is, of course, you've got your technical considerations and can you move it, and what does it take to run when you get there. But there's a whole commercial landscape that surrounds these environments, and largely that's got to do with the contracts that support and underpin the licenses that are deployed in these spaces. So we know that most organizations rely on Microsoft workloads to run their applications. So around about 70% of on-premises applications run on Windows Server. We also know that in this ecosystem, there's a great deal of end-of-life software, particularly in the Windows and SQL Server space, that will need to be addressed as part of a migration and modernization, exercise. So these two things combined are really important. Understand what the makeup of your environment is, understand the commercial landscape that surrounds that from your licensing perspective, and also understand what parts of that environment are potentially leaving you exposed to any kind of risk on both on-premises and when you're moving into the cloud. So I think there's a question that we all want to address around this Windows workload piece, which is why would you run Windows workloads on AWS? Well, I think firstly, the best place to start is that we are Microsoft's largest service provider globally, and we've been running Windows workloads in AWS services for over 12 years. We've been doing this far longer than any other cloud provider, and we've been innovating across SQL Server, Windows Server, .NET, and app modernization for the duration. And you can see that our release cycle has, if anything, accelerated over those 12 years. So starting with Windows Server 2003 back in 2008 to where we are today. In terms of performance, services, reliability, security, those sorts of things, I think we've kind of touched on that experience piece there. We've been running workloads for over 12 years. We've got millions and millions of active customers running Windows workloads on AWS today. We also, in terms of that cost of ownership, we have continually driven price points down over this time. So we've delivered 70 price reductions to our customers since 2006. It's a core focus of AWS, and it's an ethos of Amazon and who we are, being very customer centric. It's part of what we do. With the with the breadth and depth of the platform, I think the big takeaways there are that we've got a bunch of services. I think we've got more services than any other cloud provider out there. We've got 190 in play at the moment. We've got the most compute and instant types available. So whatever you're bringing from on-premises to AWS, there's a solution for. But I think importantly, we also offer a lot of flexibility around how you can license those workloads in AWS. We've got dedicated instances, for example, which can be a very attractive way to run your SQL workloads, for example. And you heard from Joe also about the lift and shift and then the modernization piece. So we obviously do a lot in that modernization space around containers, around .NET to .NET Core, and in SQL in particular. We have a lot of options there in terms of being able to optimize cost over time. So price for performance for SQL is benchmarked at 2 times better than the next closest cloud provider. And we do that in a number of ways, and Sri can probably touch on that in terms of a bit more technically around the chipset, but effectively with our proprietary chipsets, we're able to get better performance out of SQL and running those types of workloads. I think if you're talking about how do you focus on optimizing cost with the move to cloud, and how do you focus on optimizing the long-term running costs, SQL is a really, really interesting place to start in your environments. We see a lot of opportunity in most customers that are SQL heavy or running particularly a lot of SQL Enterprise, to really unpack the commercial landscape around that, to transpose what the actual requirements are to run in AWS, and to free that, that legacy debt, technical debt, the commercial requirement on paying for so much SQL licensing will typically, really help support the migration costs into cloud as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Kind of drilling into the licensing piece again, and we spoke earlier about things like end of service. So Windows and SQL in particular in your environment, a couple of areas that would be really key for you to have a great review on before you move into cloud. Now, the reason why we say this is that 50 to 60% of on-premises Microsoft workloads running on 2008 versions. 2008 is well out of support. You can see that 2008 and 2008 R2 went into end of support in January 2020. Now, this means that you've got a short window of time to address that underlying operating system, or you're going to get hit with things like extended support, fees, those sorts of things. So on top of that, compliance and regulation requirements, once that end of support hits, it exposes an organization to security threats. There's no security updates. And if you've got particular industry related regulations, it's also a really important part of your environment to get a really good grip on. We quite often find that until we really work through some style of assessment, there's a bunch of servers out there that organizations aren't even aware that are end of service and requiring additional support or requiring some action around to support their compliance requirements. So all of the things that I'm talking to today, we have some, we either have a solution to land on in AWS, or we have some tools to help support that pathway there. And these are all things that PolarSeven can support you with on your journey. I'm going to hand over to Sri at this point to talk around .NET. Joe spoke a bit about that today. In terms of the whole lift and shift into AWS, we can work with PolarSeven around some assessments to deliver for you, which I'll talk to when Sri's finished. Yeah, I'll hand over to Sri, and he can pick it up for the next couple of slides.
Can you all see my slide here?
Sri.
Yep. Can you all see? Yeah. Can you all see my slide?
Yes, we can, Sri.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yes, guys, thanks. I will quickly give you a quick intro into what I see in the market, especially when I'm talking with the customers and the kind of observation I make in them. If you look at, every time when I talk to a customer, what I hear from them is that they are in this constant pressure of upgrading or moving away from .NET full framework applications into .NET Core. The reason for that is Microsoft officially announced that .NET 4.8 is the last version of .NET full framework, and which means is that at some point in time in the near future, they're going to take that support away. So if you are in an enterprise, a large customer, the last thing you want to do is to run unsupported software. The .NET 4.8 the version support is tied to the operating system. So which means that if it supports 2019, when the operating system goes out of end of life support, the .NET framework is also going to go end of life. Now, you may experience some situations where you have to upgrade it quicker because let's say you have an application that depends on some third-party components. Usually this is to do with some graphing libraries, PDF generators. It can be some kind of third-party application that you are using. It could be Telerik components that you are using. When those components go out of support, they usually don't build for newer. They don't build for .NET full framework. All those components are now available in .NET Core. So you have a compelling reason to move away from .NET full framework into .NET Core. That's a constant thing that I hear in the market. Most of the greenfield projects, when the customer starts, is always going to be on .NET Core. For a .NET developer, moving from .NET full framework to .NET Core is not a huge technical gap. The programming language is pretty much the same. Experience is the same. Developer tools are pretty much the same. And more importantly, because Microsoft officially announced this, it's the trend all over. So what can you get by moving into .NET Core? The obvious thing is that you can run these applications on Linux. So that will save your Microsoft licensing. What you'll find is Windows is not optimized for server environments. So let's say you have a couple of web servers running. It's not the best environment to run because the operating system overhead itself is going to take a lot of your resources. So if you can, now you can, by moving into Linux, you can run the same workload, but in a smaller instances that will drastically reduce your cost to operate. It's now a matured platform, .NET Core. Microsoft gave a really good roadmap of how they're going to release that. So previously, when the .NET Core first came, the market was like, are we going to go into .NET Core? But now it's a pretty established one. If you look at a good way to check this one is to check advertisements for jobs. You will find that everybody is asking for .NET Core. On top of that, you are going to experience a decent performance gain because it's a lightweight program. You can expect about 20 to 30% improvement when you run in .NET Core on Linux. The other reason that the other trend that I see in the market is especially like that you can see that a lot of hardware improvement happening in this space. If you look at the new releases of Apple chips and AMD chips, what you'll find is there's a lot of the entire chip market is moving towards ARM processors, so advanced RISC machines. They are power efficient, which means that you can run them efficiently on data centers, and also they give better performance, about 40% for AWS Graviton 2 processors compared to generation x86 instances. So what you'll find is that there are some articles on the internet. If you search like how good .NET Core runs on these ARM processors, you'll find a lot of articles why those performance improvements are there, and Microsoft itself is pushing towards ARM processors. So overall, like when you move into .NET Core, there are a lot of benefits. Number one, in cost savings. Number two is around performance, and number three is actually, as Joe mentioned, the developer productivity and satisfaction. And also, PolarSeven is, of course, recently they got our EC2 Service Studio program, a great partner for us to work with. Over to you, Joe. Over to you, Dara.
Thank you for that, Sri. So I'll just steal. Bear with me 1 second.
Sorry, Darryl, did you want me to just cover off the optimization licensing assessment a little bit before we jump back into some Q&A?
Sure, yeah.
Awesome, all good. So
can I just say as well, the Q&A, if you want to do Q&A, there's a Q&A window. If you want to pop some questions in there, that'll be great. Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. So we talked a little bit about understanding what it is you have in terms of your estate before you take the leap into cloud, on your AWS journey. And Shree's also talked to, you know, the opportunity around that .NET piece, and obviously Joe has as well. So I think the great place to start is around understanding your baseline, understanding the costs that you're going to have when you move into the cloud. And being able to build out a plan. And these things are the elements that PolarSeven can address for you in terms of assessment when looking at an optimization licensing assessment, something that AWS and PolarSeven work together around to ensure you get these sort of outcomes. So what the optimization licensing assessment entails and how it is, I guess, slightly different to a typical assessment is, you know, when I referenced before around understanding your commercial estate. So not just looking at the technical requirements, but also understanding the impact on your commercial requirements around your licensing agreements. This is something that we can address with the optimization licensing assessment. So it gives you a complete holistic view of what's going on in your environment and how you can, you know, move forward. Now, if you're looking at a modernization strategy, not just a migration strategy, this is also a great place to start, because it can give you your baseline. It can give you a really clear window into what you have in your environment. We don't know what we don't know sometimes, right? So people are always surprised with what we can find out in running these things. We will go through and gather the data, and that data, you know, it becomes part of your baseline, becomes part of your ability to reference, you know, current state to future state. We can really drill into this with you to help support business cases around really defining what the total cost of ownership is going to be like. And it can be multiple options sometimes, right? Sometimes it can be a view of what does it look like to just migrate? What does it look like to fully modernize? And these can also, you know, if you are really looking at a comprehensive or a more comprehensive modernization pathway, we can get into things like detailed application mapping and whatnot off the back of this as well. So we have run, you know, thousands of these globally with the optimization licensing assessment. And on average, we see from on-premises into AWS, average cost reductions of 30 to 40% off migrate alone. So, you know, you heard from Joe, sort of 40% on the modernization. There was no doubt savings that they were already had achieved from ClickView, already achieved from moving on-premises, from Azure into AWS. So there were cost savings there, and then the extension of that into the modernized state.
Did you want to share that slide, Sarah?
Yeah, so the last one here it is. This is a view from an aggregated view from all of those assessments that we've had an eye across over time.
Can't see any slides, Sara.
Oh, so I've been talking away and not sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I stole it back by accident.
Okay, sorry. All good. So I just spoke to the optimization. Can you see that one? I just spoke to the. Can you see now?
Yes, I can see that now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So we just spoke to what are the challenges that this will address, and what are some of the benefits that you'll see out of running a PolarSeven optimization licensing assessment with AWS. So what we see here is an aggregate of the typical savings that we see across these, you know, the thousands of engagements that we've run globally through partners. So typically a 36% savings in compute. And if we get really drill down into that licensing piece, which will really focus on your SQL and your Windows, because that's where we know the majority of the overspend's happening in most environments. You know, we'll see on average a 49% reduction in SQL cores alone. There's a couple of really great customer references, one particular in region we've probably talked to a number of times as AWS, but it's a real poster child for this piece that we've just been talking about today, which is migrate and then modernize. So Xero reduced a significant amount of spend on their SQL estate a couple of years ago by migrating that into AWS and benefiting from the 2 times performance that they could get out of that, reduced amount of cores and reduced their commercial requirements around what they had to spend in licensing. And now they're on a journey of optimizing. So they're moving off the SQL Server platform and into more native cloud options. So they're both very public customer references that you can go and see, and we can share those links back with PolarSeven to send out to you if you've got some interest. And that's really what I wanted to touch on. So back over to you, Daryl.
Thank you for that, Sarah. So now, thank you. Can you see my screen again? Yep. So thank you, Sarah and Sri. Very insightful. So is there any questions that we have at this stage? Just checking if you want to put them in the Q&A. So Shiraz, yes, we'll share the slides afterwards. Are there any questions? The links, yes, we'll share the links afterwards. Sorry, Sri, go ahead.
Do you want to tell a bit about like how an Ola engagement with PolarSeven would work? Like, what's the structure of that kind of an engagement?
Yeah, no, I'll jump onto that in the next slide. This is just for the Q&A session, so the closeout slide is the next one. So I guess, Joe, do you have like, did you guys look at Lambda or going serverless or containers? What was the decisions around doing that?
So Sara and Sri probably won't like me for saying this, but I'm not a fan of Lambda. I think that the savings are nice, but the complexity around that is, that there's logic in all different places. I like having our code base in one place. I don't know numbers, Siraj, off the top of my head, but against those two. But we decided very much that landing at sort of microservices on containers is definitely cost effective, and it wasn't worth us going further to sort of serverless. I imagine if you play this video in 5 years, though, I'll change my tune, and a lot more things will be serverless. I think that is where things are going, and you pay for just the lifetime of the request or whatever it is. It's definitely a lot more efficient in that sense. But I think that initially, I'm not sure what your current architecture looks like, but if you're running Windows VMs, I would probably say walk before you run and just move to, upgrade to .NET Core, get that running on Linux, even EC2. Windows VM. Yeah, even if you can get Linux EC2, you're going to be laughing versus running Windows VMs. And then it's a really easy change to run things in Docker, but from a Linux EC2. I'm not a fan of serverless or of Lambda personally, but that's just my honest opinion. That's saying I'm not an Amazon shill.
Yeah. Do you have some Lambda though? And I guess this is the evolution of things, as you say, as some services might evolve in the future and you might write them in serverless. So time will tell.
Yeah, we do have some. We don't run it for production. So there are some really good candidates in our infrastructure for serverless. For example, we run services that take really nice thumbnails of videos and things like that. And that's a really great example of something you can do nice in Lambda. What we currently use Lambda for is just turning off our staging environments and non-prod environments at night or when developers aren't using them. So we have this whole, this is a really nice way to save some money. If you're looking for a way to sort of manage costs, is just to turn off things that aren't being used. So we have some Lambda scripts which turn all our non-production environments off when we're not in business hours. And that's saved us a chunk of change.
Yeah, great. So there's no more questions for. Sorry, go on.
There's one question on the chat window, I believe.
Do you want to answer it there, Sri?
So the question is accessing AWS services and events from containerized environment. You can access any event, pretty much all the services that AWS offers through container environment. Not only that, you can also get access to AWS services in some kind of a special private link. So instead of communicating through public endpoints, services like S3, EC2, and pretty much all the APIs now can be accessed through private links.
Cool. Rav, if you want to look at licensing assessments, AWS is always happy to help with that. So if you say, hey, this is what we're currently running on Windows, what would this look like at Linux? That's something that AWS is always happy to help. So, don't be afraid to ask them to, make a good business case for why you should move to them. They're happy to do that work, absolutely. And Lee, what other opportunities did we get from moving to AWS? Well, there's quite a few, to be honest with you. Obviously, stability's been really, really good for us. I think as well as you, I'm not sure what your organization looks like, but if you're a larger customer, they definitely sort of there to support you and to work with you on, whether it's supporting growth efforts or, giving you proof of concept sort of funding, things like that. So, they kind of take the approach of we're more of a partner than it's a sort of once-off transaction. And so they if you grow on them, it's mutually beneficial. So for example, we stream hundreds of terabytes of video every month. So CDN to us is really, really important. So that's a great example of where we've worked with their CDN team. We've spoken to their teams over there and about our use cases, and been shown roadmap maps up ahead, influence the roadmap, things like that. So there's a lot of, I do speak quite highly of Amazon because I do think that they do a really good job. So there's been a lot of sort of upside just from being on that ecosystem. If there's something specific though, if you want to ask, I'm happy to answer that.
Great, thanks for that. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sri, for your comments there. So I guess today, next steps. We hope you enjoyed the stories today. So if you would like to accelerate your migrations, so the PolarSeven optimization and licensing assessment, this is where it evaluates your existing on-premise Windows environment, and in typically a 4 to 6 week period, provides clear direction on your migration and how to save on infrastructure and Microsoft licensing costs. So coming back to Joe's point, this is where you can go in and you can do this assessment without affecting any of your existing running workloads. You can treat this as a nice piece of work that will give you lots of intel around how much you can potentially save over the period of time by going to containers, going to .NET Core, changing database engines. All that sort of stuff can be discussed in those 4 to 6 week period. So that's the assessment phase. If you're already on AWS and you'd like to accelerate your modernization piece, a PolarSeven well-architected review is for you. Reviewing the state of your AWS workloads and implementing well-architected best practices will help you to discover untapped opportunities and provide clear guidance on a modernization direction. If you're more technically inclined, we will be running some hands-on immersion sessions, which are number restricted and by invitation only, and links to these offerings, the optimizations, the modernizations, the WAFers, and the immersion days will be provided after this. Thank you all for joining us today. If there's no more questions, Joe, Sri, Sarah, thank you very much for offering your time. It's much appreciated. And we look forward to the next one, which will be on in about 2 to 3 months' time. And it'll be the evolution on this one. So any feedback you have for us, please share thoughts, ideas with us. Give us a call. Look forward to seeing you again soon.